Hello everyone. Today I'm trimming some of these, I call them small lidded dishes, and I thought I'd do a little video with my fancy new camera to see how this thing works. This is it's a 2-pound bowl. This is the lid, I think is 1.5 pounds. It's what I call a flange lid. They're thrown a couple days ago. They've been sitting under plastic, and they're just a little bit stiffer than I like, but they'll do the job. I was fortunate with this one that the lid actually fits. Sometimes you have to go back in and tweak them or trim them a little bit, but looks like I know what I'm doing this time. Okay, when I trim these, I actually trim the lid on the pot, which is a little bit easier because it's kind of hard to center this on the wheel and then trim right down to the edge and all that kind of junk. And also, using this as a chuck, it's easier, but it's also nice because you can see the shape of the lid in relation to the shape of the pot. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do here is get this centered, and I'm just going to center the lid. Well, all I'm worried about is the lid right now. I'll do the bottom part separately. You can see it kind of goes up and down a little bit. Sometimes if you spin it around, it's a little better. That's good enough. I'm going to attach this bowl pretty well because if you don't, it'll tend to kind of wants to rock sometimes, especially with these pieces that are a little bit taller. The wide ones, you don't really have that problem. I used to throw everything on little bats. Tons of these things. I have like 60 of them. I hardly use them anymore. But they're nice because you could actually just keep the bottom piece attached to the bat, pop it back on the wheel, and it's centered. But then sometimes, if your rim is a little off, then the lid doesn't sit centered, and so it's kind of a moot point to do that. So I don't do it anymore. Okay. And it's really important to hold down on this lid while you're trimming it, because otherwise it'll want to pop up. My trimming tool is just a little dull. It needs to be sharpened. If this clay was as soft as I like it, it wouldn't be an issue. It's fine. I really like the shapes of these lids to have that sort of, I don't know what you'd call it, this sort of a shape. I think of a Japanese roof line for some of those old Japanese temples, Buddhist temples that would do this. I really like that shape. I think this lid's just a little too wide. Take just a little bit off here. For the knob, I'm just going to take a big old chunk of clay. It's maybe a little too much. Goop this up a little bit. Try and get this as close to the center as you can. And I'm going to start pushing down on this. And I'm pushing from up high, one, because I don't want to trap any air, but also I want this edge, the bottom edge, to sort of be kind of wide. So I'm not just going to push straight down. I'm going to push from the top and kind of down and out. When I'm throwing this knob, I basically just have my fingertips wet and just a little bit of water on the clay right here, because I don't want piles of water just all over this lid, because I just went to all this trouble to trim this, and I really like that trim texture, and the water will ruin all that, and then I'll have to go back again, and you know, what a hassle. I'm basically just centering this piece of clay, and I'm going to shape it into the what I call a rough shape. That'll do. Now what I'm going to do, and this is the tricky part, I really want the texture of the knob to match the texture of the lid. And so this has that turned texture where the clay is roughened up. And when I slip this, after it's fired, they won't look the same, because the slip reacts differently over a turned surface than it does over a thrown surface. So I'm basically just going to go back in and trim this knob now. And I used to wait until they were leather hard, but it's such a hassle, because you trim the pot, you put the knob on there, and then you got to set it aside and then bring it back and trim it again. So I just do it wet now, which can be a little tricky. You'll notice that I always catch this trimming right when it comes off, because this clay is really wet, and if it falls back onto the knob, it'll just stick. And I leave this little guy on the top of my knobs. And I'm trying as best I can to make the top of this knob relate in shape to the top of the lid. And I want to have a break, or a shadow line where the lid meets the knob. So I'm just going to trim this little edge right here. And now this is the trickiest part. You kind of have to do this, and you kind of just have one chance to do it. I'm going to dig the trimming tool in here and just move it upwards and sort of create this concave area inside the knob. And the reason I say you only have really one chance is because I take so much clay at once, and I do it so directly that it leaves this really nice line. And if you hesitate, or if you screw up and you have to go back, you're going to lose both the shape and the line. So I'll try and do it as best I can with the first go. I like that. That's pretty good. Okay, now because this is a solid knob, it could make it through the firing, but chances are it'll probably crack right around here. And sometimes they'll just pop off completely. So what I'm going to do is just hollow out the knob a little bit, and this keeps it from cracking or popping off. And I'm not going to hollow out the whole knob. I'm basically just going to put a hole right in the middle of the lid and go down maybe about that far. I'm going to use this guy. This is the only thing I use this trimming tool for. I hate these things. I think they leave just awful marks on pots, but that's just my opinion. It's the only tool I have that's small enough to make a little hole in here. And I basically just go down until I can feel the change in the wetness of the clay, because the lid is leather hard and the knob is really soft, and you'll feel that difference when you trim through it. It'll also, once you get too deep, if you try and trim out instead of just straight down, here I'll show you, the lid will actually, well, of course it's not going to do it. The lid will sort of come loose and it'll start moving around. So you can see there, just that tiny little hole, and that'll do. That's all it needs. So we'll call that done. Let's set this aside. And we'll do the base. base of this bowl real quick. They've turned the heat off in our building, and it's kind of cold today, so it's a little chilly in here, and I'm sniffling a little bit. Each room has its own thermostat, but it's these large buildings. You either have heat or you have AC. You don't have them both at the same time. And they turned the heat off a little early this year. I normally trim bowls on top of a chuck, which is a lot easier than having to deal with these clay wads and recentering it and all that junk. But since I have to do the lid and then the pot, and I'd have to have a chuck on a separate bat, and it just becomes too much trouble. I'm too lazy for all that. First thing I do when I'm trimming a bowl is I decide the shape and the width of the foot, which is what I'm doing here. And I get that mostly how I want it, and then I'm going to go back in and sort of work with this area right here. Oh, that bowl, that seems pretty well centered, doesn't it? It is what it is. That, can you see that? That bowl was kind of, that bowl in relation to the foot, it's pretty bad. Okay, let's stamp it. I have this weird thing where I always have to interrupt a line with my stamp, so I have this trimming line right here, and then I'll just take my stamp and interrupt that line. I don't know why I do that, I just like the way it looks, I guess. Pretty good. Huh? Yeah. Well, there you go. Have a good day.